Well, good evening, everybody. Great to have you a part of the call. We're very excited for tonight's call. I just want to say a few words, kind of prefacing things here a little bit. And certainly Jen and Melissa have outdone themselves with a great informative format for everybody. So very grateful to have you a part of this. And we're very grateful to do these steps along the way for clients to provide exceptional resources. And, kind of talking tonight on a lighter note, I know in Jen's email, she mentioned, her and Melissa have each read hundreds, but it's probably more thousands of essays the three of us have read over a number of years. So there's a lot of expertise guiding the process. I know Jen and I have worked hard to craft a really great brainstorming essay development process that really lets a student shine forward unique attributes. I think one of the great advantages we bring to the process is a very admissions official focused approach to writing essays and allowing the students to have a great voice. So Jen's going to talk about those things tonight. For those of you who haven't met Jen, Jen is our senior educational planner here. Many of you have met her. Does an exceptional job, and many of you will be working with her during your college journey. Also tonight, very importantly, we have a very special guest, Melissa Brock, joining us from Iowa.
Hi.
And Melissa's been a great collaborator and partner. And I do want to explain for a couple minutes why Melissa's here. As Campus to Career Crossroads has grown, I've wanted to make sure our clients have all the resources for best success. Many top college planning companies, as we monitor the industry, have essay editors. It's very, very common. And I want to make sure we have best-in-class resources to provide you, the clients, the best outcomes. With that in mind, we're very selective of who we use for essay editing. I'm proud to use Melissa. I'm very confident with her. Where Melissa comes into play, and many of us have talked about this during our introduction calls with me, Melissa does a tremendous job of editing, condensing, and making sure essays are perfectly grammatic and authentic. And that's a really important thing. As you know, we navigate hyper-competitive admissions pools. We're facing the fourth record-setting year as we embark on your college journey. So having somebody like Melissa provide amazing essay writing, and most importantly, Melissa was an admissions official for 12 years. Mm-hmm. So she's read thousands of essays too. I guess we can all move our resumes up a little bit. But as you'll see tonight, Melissa has a tremendously warm and gracious style, very exceptional with editing, condensing, and sometimes we're all guilty of this, myself included. We may think we're writing something, but what we're writing may have a different meaning written, and Melissa's very good at catching that, reframing that, making sure that we're always putting our students and our clients in the most positive light. So again, I'm very confident of Jen, myself, and Melissa, but I will turn things over to Jen and Melissa for a really great informative program, and appreciate everybody jumping in.
Hi, everyone. I am Jen Parsons. For those of you that I haven't met, I'm also a mom to a freshman college student and actually rising sophomore. So, I've been through this process as a parent, and I know how stressful this is. So hopefully we have a way of making the essay writing process fun, and we'll talk about that. So let's go ahead and get started, and let's talk about how we can make your essay stand out. All right. So one of the things that I do like to mention right off the bat is that the college essay is different from anything that you've ever written. So that's the first thing to know is, I always like to say it's kind of taking everything you've learned and almost throwing it out the window. But so we'll talk about all the different tips as we go along. So the first thing I want to point out is that the average admissions official is actually reading about 500 to 1,000 essays per cycle. So how is that important to you, and why do you need to know that? Well, you have a very limited amount of time to catch an admissions officer's attention. And so when it comes to the actual essay process, they're only spending about 5 minutes doing a quick review. And so here's the thing, if they're bored or you don't hook them right from the beginning, there's a really good chance they're just going to toss your essay aside, and that's all that's going to be read of your essay. So another thing that's super important that they're looking for, and admissions officials have been trained to look at this, is that they're looking for forced essays. So if it's not sounding like you, if it's not sounding like a 17 or 18-year-old, that's going to send a red flag. So one other piece of advice is really to just write the way you speak. You know, if you can take your essay, and we'll talk about this later, and you can read it and it sounds like you, that's a good thing. All right, let's also talk a little bit about core values. So we use core values during the essay brainstorming process. And so you can think of core values similar to your character traits. So they're important when you're making decisions, building relationships, and solving problems. But we also use them during the essay brainstorming because we want you to refer back to these values as you craft your essay. So we want to make sure who you are is coming across in your application. And we'll also talk about how you can use those core values when you're doing the draft review of your essay. All right, this is the one that is so important because this is really what it's all about. It's about telling your story. So the first thing that I like to tell students is quit worrying about what everyone else is writing. This time of year, students start talking and they're worried about what their friends writing and what their take on it is. Quit doing that. Only think about yourself in this manner. So college essays take like I said before, college essays take everything you've learned, throws it out the window. It's not about formal English writing. Formal English writing is important in terms of grammar and sentence structure, but it's not a formal paper like you're used to. So what you need to remember is that everyone loves a story. It makes you human. Remember, your application is all facts. So this is the way an admissions officer is going to see a different side of you. When you're reading, think of it this way. An admissions officer is looking at it to see, is this person going to be a good fit on campus? Are they going to be a good roommate or a team player? These are all things they're playing in the back of their mind when they're reading this essay. So you need a story that reveals something important about you and also speaks to your core values. You're going to continue hearing me say the core values piece because we really like to bring that to focus. And then the last piece that I talk about with Tell Your Story is write from your heart. And by heart, I mean heart and soul. If you're excited or passionate about the topic you're writing about, it will come across to the admissions officer. All right. Now let's talk about brainstorming. So everyone, at least the ones I've worked with so far, everyone knows when it comes to the essay process, I'm a big believer in brainstorming. So more often I've found that when we do the essay sessions, the brainstorming sessions, I typically end up helping students find topics in which a lot of times they'll say after the fact, I never thought about writing about that. So the reason that that's important is typically students, again, have that formal mindset, that have that formal writing style mindset. So they're not necessarily in storytelling mode. So one of the things that you can do behind the scenes, and this is even beyond our brainstorming session, is talk to your family and friends to get insight and ask them to tell stories about you. So if you think of it this way, think about it almost in intervals, right? So think elementary school, middle school, high school. Make those connections to show growth and evolution. Even look at photos to jog your memory. These are all part of the storytelling process. And so this is where it continues to show how you've evolved, who you've become. And again, you're going to hear me say it again and again, how you can draw attention to your core values. So the one good thing about brainstorming too, is if you're making notes with all of this process, this is something where you can even use them later during supplemental. So you may not use every idea for your Common App essay, but you might find little tidbits of information that you can use later on. Okay, now let's talk about where we need to use caution. Oh, there we go. All right, so this is where we want you to be careful. So typically, I like to start with the general topics that I like to see avoided. And so those tend to be, for me, sports, mission work, and industry injuries. So we see this all the time. These topics tend to be very overdone. And so I will say a lot of times when I get a brand new essay and I have a chance to review, if it's one of these topics, I will typically tell you to kindly rethink that topic. The reason I say that is you think about it again in terms of you being an admissions officer and putting yourself in their shoes. You might be the third or fourth essay of the day that they're reading on the same topic. And so by the end, they don't really care what you're even saying, because all they know is I've read this 3 times today and I'm so bored out of my mind. And I'm going to use this as an example, so I hope I'm not offending anyone, but this is a typical mission trip essay that and I'm not reading the essay, I'm just giving you the overview. I've seen this happen so many times, and this is kind of the general consensus of a mission trip. Last summer, I set out on a trip with my youth group to such and such a place. I expected to have an impact on the lives of the people around me, but in fact, it was my life that was changed. I cannot tell you the amount of essays I've read that have started with that type of sentence. And I can only imagine, if I've read that many, how many an admissions officer is reading this on a year-to-year basis. So here's the thing. It does not mean that this mission trip was not a profound experience for you. But when it's overdone, you don't want to be yet another essay in a pile of essays that all sound the same. So hopefully that makes sense. Another one, you do not want to rehash your application. This might sound typical, but actually a lot of students think that providing a summary of everything they've already provided in their application makes sense. So I would say just avoid doing that. So we have plenty of other topics we can look at. And one other word of caution when it comes to essay topics, and again, I'm just asking you to think of this in terms of caution. Be careful of religion or politics, because everyone has a different view, and you may end up opening yourself up to unbiased judgment just because you don't know what your reader has a viewpoint on. So those are just all topics to be careful of. Now I want to talk a little bit about teacher advice. And so this really comes into play because, again, you've heard me mention, this is not a formal report in terms of writing. So a lot of times teachers are very well-meaning, but what we've found, they typically are not reviewing for content. And so often, many times over the years, I've seen essays where a student has provided it to me as a first draft, and they've said, well, my English teacher said it was great. And I'll look at it and I'll go, structurally, grammatically, it is great. It absolutely is, but that doesn't make it a great essay. So I typically will say, let's start over, because if the content's not there, it really doesn't matter how great grammatically and structurally it is. They need to have their attention on you. And if they're bored, it's not going to work. So English teachers, great for review. If you have an English teacher that you trust, absolutely utilize their help, but be very careful when it comes to content. All right, here's another one, unnatural vocabulary. So here's what I want to say about this. If your admissions officer reading your essay needs a dictionary to understand what you meant, you may want to rethink your words. You're not trying to impress that person with every SAT word you've ever learned. And the same goes for technical jargon. So here's the thing when it comes to that, right? We want you to be writing about your potential career field. We want you to talk about that, but you may want to avoid the highly technical terms. And what I mean by that is, engineering, computer science, medical terms. This is not the academic department professor that's reading your essay. It's just a normal person. And so we think of it in terms of an unskilled professional that doesn't know that field should be able to read and understand your essay. And then to that extent, if you're worried you have too much of that in there, read it out loud or have a family member or friend read it. Ask them if it sounds like you talking. Does it sound forced? Does it sound fake? If it does, you might want to rethink it. And then finally, the last warning here is reveal, don't boast. So we always talk about this is not a time for humility. We don't want you actually holding back. We want you to put your best foot forward, but we also don't want it to come across as braggy. So I like to call this the humble brag. If you're looking at your draft and you find as you're reading through, you have way too many sentences that start with the word I I want you to rethink maybe rephrasing some of these areas. Okay. All right. And then let's talk about some simple tips. So I will tell you, some of these may really seem completely obvious to you, but it never fails. This happens every single year. So first one, answer the prompt. Again, seems obvious, but a lot of times once you get started, and I will say this actually, I think, pertains more even to the supplementals. Students start writing, they get off track, and by the time they're done, they realize they didn't even answer it. And the problem is sometimes they don't even go back to read themselves the prompt again to realize they're not actually answering it. So very simple, go back, read the question, make sure you've answered it. The next one, show, don't tell. So the big thing with this is you do want to evoke emotion. And I like to say you want to give your admissions officer almost a immersive and visual experience as if they were there with you. So how do you do this? Well, the best thing to do is be able to describe, set the scene, use the sensory details. And by that, I mean, document sights, sounds, smells, tastes, feelings. Take your reader on a journey with you as if they were there right beside you. The next one, get it down on paper. So anytime we do essay brainstorming, what I like to tell students is just write, get it down on paper. Now is not the time for self-editing. Now's not the time for, trying to make sure you're hitting all the word counts as you go. We'll do that later. We help with that. We help you pare down. Get the words down on paper. I always say, if you're in a pattern and you just have words flowing out of you, get them down and do not worry about that. And then when you get to the point of you feel like your essay draft is done, you've written it, it seems pretty good to you, what I want you to do is walk away. And by that, I mean, set it aside. Don't look at it for a couple days. Give yourself a break. Then go back and proofread. I think looking at it with a fresh set of eyes really helps, almost you have that view of an admissions reader. And also give it to a friend or a family member to read as well. And then I also want to make sure, again, this seems like common sense, but always capture this, always find it every single year. Do not use text language or street lingo. Again, seems pretty simple. And then finally, this is my last piece of advice. So this is what I typically have students do when they get to the point of, again, essays ready to go, or at least they think it's ready to go, feels good. I want to provide almost like a checklist, and I call this the thumb test. And so when I say the thumb test, what I'm saying is if I took your essay and put my thumb over your name, could this be any random student's essay, or is it unique to you? And some of the things that we can do in order to make sure that that's being accomplished is simply, did you take your reader to a specific place or time? We just mentioned that. And so this is why description is key. Use verbs to describe, right? The other one is making sure you have enough so what moments. And by that, I mean, are you revealing something important about yourself? Again, this is where I'm going to tell you, if you are taking a look at your core values list, compare it to your current essay that you have finished, make sure you've woven those values into your essay. And if you haven't, go back and try to make sure that you are hitting those areas. And then the last one, just making sure from the beginning, did your essay's first sentence draw you in? That's what we've referred to as a hook. And then also when I mention, does the last sentence leave the reader wanting more? It means if they have actually gotten to the point where they read that much of your essay and they wish you would have kept writing, that's a great thing. And so in closing, the other thing is, do not, for a conclusion of your Common App essay, don't restate all your key points. This is a story, not a formal paper. And so what you do want to do in closing is tie up loose ends, make those connections, and if you can, kind of look towards the future and possibly even relate it back to your opening paragraph if there's a way to do that. That's typically how we like to see you end your Common App. So those are all my words of advice, tips, tricks, and I am now going to turn it over to Melissa.
Great. Excellent. Well, she's getting the slide set up. Just wanted to mention again that I was in admission for 12 years. I worked in admission for a really long time. So I love this question. What does an admission professional want to see? And it is just anything that we can learn more about you. And Jen did mention that earlier, and I just want to reiterate that again, that is absolutely true. We want to learn more about you, more than what's in your basic application. So the more you can do to make it sound or make it your application, make this essay different than your application, the more you can do that, the better. So again, can we learn more about what you mentioned in other parts of your application? That's what we want to hear. So as much as you can do that, great. So you can do that by implementing unique and meaningful content. And a lot of kids will kind of say, well, I'm not really sure, what part of my life is unique and meaningful that I could bring to the table. A lot of kids sometimes struggle for that, but it doesn't have to be this major life transformation necessarily. It can be one part of your life, one small part of your life that made this huge difference. Maybe it was fishing with your grandpa when you were 11 years old and the life lessons that taught you. It's something like that that is meaningful, but that will stand out amongst all the other candidates that are applying for admission. Whenever you can, try to incorporate little particles of your personality. So use humor, show your creativity, use imagery. Jen kind of talked about that a little bit, but paint the scene of wherever you are. Let's say you are fishing with your grandpa. What does that look like? Where are you? What are the words that he used? What are the kind of the ways that you can be creative about sharing that information? The next thing is authenticity. I think that sometimes, you get caught up in wanting to impress an admission professional, but what we really just want to see is the authentic you rise to the top. Who are you? Who are you as a person? What do we need to know about you that we don't already, again, that you haven't mentioned before? Just try to make those kind of things rise to the top. And then you can kind of think of this as sort of a job interview in kind of a weird way. Why should we hire you? Why should we admit you? That is the question you're always answering in anything that you put forth to a college. And that's including when you visit the campus too. They're looking for these kinds of clues because, again, they're getting so many fantastic applicants that you need to stand out. So why should we hire you? And, maybe you've been asked this in a job interview situation. Why should we hire you? Just be always thinking about that. And you don't need to necessarily state that in your essay. You should admit me because, but just be kind of planting those seeds. So an admission professional will say, yes, we need to have this person on our campus. Okay, I think I'm ready for the next slide, Jen, if you want to. So tips for your lead paragraph. My absolute favorite part is the lead. And that's with anything. And it kind of just sets it up. Why are we here? It's the who, what, where, why, when. And in journalism, that's what they teach you. And you're setting all of this up, and it's kind of a challenge and really actually kind of fun. So think about your absolute favorite novel. How did it draw you in? Why did you keep reading? What did it do? And I actually encourage you to pick up some books and just start reading those first paragraphs, not to copy them necessarily. Obviously, you don't want to do that, but just to see how they get you to keep reading. So I actually just, give an example there, Anna Karenina by Tolstoy. And the first line is, it draws you in right away. It's all happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And, not that you want to use that as your topic, but still just see how it makes you want to read more. And, try to do that in your essays too, especially with that first line, that first paragraph. And then start doing that. Start taking that first idea that you have and just start typing. What are some ways I can draw my reader in? How can I use interesting ways to explain what I am trying to convey here? And then one of my favorite things, and this is kind of, I know Jen and will say too that Melissa likes dialogue, and I don't be afraid to use dialogue, and that goes for the rest of your essay, not just the lead paragraph, but it makes it so interesting. It's like a book. It's like something that you're just reading out of a page of, Hunger Games or something like that. It's really, really interesting for admission professionals. Again, you're trying to make yourself stand out. Nobody else uses dialogue. I mean, I'm not very rarely, so that's one way you can distinguish yourself. Going back to that place on the creek with your grandpa at age 11. What did he say? Did he have an accent? Did he have a twang, a Southern twang? Does he, it's just all of those kinds of things you can add to your essay to make it really, really interesting. And that's just a suggestion. You don't have to do that, but it's a really great way to kind of keep the flow going in your essay. And then writing and visual organization. So this is sort of like how you set it up so that it's easy for somebody to go through your essay. So even if you don't consider yourself a writer, try to write how you speak. So instead of saying, I do not go to the grocery store every day, you don't say that. You say, I don't go to the grocery store every day. Just try to organize your speaking and your think through how, when you're making quotes in there, or even the way you're writing it yourself in paragraphs, just think about how you speak and how you would say something. You want this to be very engaging, more like a conversation rather than, very stilted formal paragraphs. Make the whole thing more like a conversation as much as you can. So, and then also do go back to basics on English when you start a new topic or thought, create a new paragraph. Even if it's really short, it's really easy for the, human eye to kind of understand in organization format. And then also just makes it simpler to read. Like I said, the human mind likes organization. The next thing is you don't have to be a great writer to write a great essay. I think that students get that blank cursor just blinking at them, that blank screen is the most intimidating thing ever. And I think that just remember, you can still write a great essay because, again, it's about you. You're the expert on you. Nobody else can write this essay but you. And that's the thing you need to remember. So don't take it as you need to be Tolstoy. You don't. You're writing about yourself from your human experience. And then my last tip is do check for errors. One of the essays I read when I was in admission, I will never forget this because it was so funny. This student was talking about how they collected toiletries for homeless people, and they wrote toilet trees instead of toiletries. So it's things like that, again, I'll never forget it. I'm not even sure if the student got admitted, but just look for errors in those very common things. So again, it's always a good thing to pass it off to somebody else so they don't let you submit something that says toilet trees. So those are my tips.
All right. So I want to thank everyone, obviously, for listening. Thank you, Melissa, so much for co-presenting. And Jason, thank you.